there's this wonderful sense of fascination about nature, and there's a lot of beauty.
Human beings are a curious bunch. We want to know what's around the corner. We have to go past that next bend in the road.
Just by being out there, being an observer, one recognizes change.
Where are we going? What's the future going to be? Real nature that nobody has tinkered with. There are not many places like that anymore.
Out in the field, it's a living laboratory.
Science is detective work. There's a mystery to solve.
We had to learn how nature operates.
Through science, it's our job to tackle this.
Now we're learning how to rehabilitate systems.
You see the response.
We found a whole new way of looking at nature.
Our quest was to find out whether species change. There was no better place to search for evidence than in the Amazon. Astonishing.
I have never seen anything like this before.
We can use knowledge all across our planet.
We have to build an army of scientists around the world.
This is your time. This is your day.
We can restore nature and bring it back to something whole.
All right.
It was spectacular. We saw that there was still resilience there.
Wildlife had returned.
One of the greatest gifts science has to offer is a way to make sense of our world.
This is where we live.
These are all stories of hope.
And we are back. I'm Christiana Mertens, coming at you live from the National Academy of Sciences Beckman Center in Irvine, now in sunny California. Welcome back to Session 2, or for the first time, welcome to Session 2 of the Nobel Prize Summit. We're so sorry we had technical troubles during Session 1, and if we happen to experience them again, just hang tight and look for the little sticky notes on the platform that will let you know where to go. So first, I hope you enjoyed that footage as much as I did, and a big thank you to Tangle Bank Studios from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute for sharing that with us. For those of you who were with us earlier today and returning for this session, well, you know the drill. But for those of you that are just starting with us now, it's my job to help make this an easy, enjoyable experience. I am your main stage guide, and I'll be helping you navigate the virtual platform, introducing our speakers and presenters, and popping in to remind you of where you need to be and when. If you're ever feeling a little bit lost, always go back to the lobby. It's where you want to go to orient to all the places you need to be. From there, you can review the program. Remember, this is a 3-day summit, and while I'm only guiding you through the main stage programming, we also have academic science sessions that will happen tomorrow and Wednesday, and a variety of solution sessions that are also happening on Wednesday. So check everything out because there is so much going on. I also want to be sure that you know that we are recording this entire summit. Videos from the main stage sessions will be available in the lobby when the sessions conclude. We've collected some other things for you in the Exploration Hub. There are some videos that relate to the summit and some links to some really interesting websites. We've also provided a lot of ways for you to connect with one another, and you can find out more about this in the networking lounge where there are roundtables and chat rooms, so absolutely do not forget to check them out. This event is so much more than us talking at you. It is truly about creating space for an important conversation about a future we want to build together. It's about us interacting with each other and with one another. And seriously, we asked you in our invitation, what can we do right now to put this world on a more sustainable track so that we can all enjoy a more prosperous future? And we urged you to be part of the solution. And if you're here, well, we know you've accepted that challenge. And we bet you have your own ideas and how we could answer that question. Because let me tell you, we certainly do not have all the answers. And we are counting on you to have some of them. So connect with one another, share your thoughts, and share those thoughts with us, please. The hashtag for the summit is #Nobel Prize Summit. And our hosts are so keen to hear from you on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or whatever platform. But right now we have a question for you. What have you learned from the pandemic about building resilience to future shocks? The Nobel Foundation, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Research, the Stockholm Resilience Center, and the Bayer Institute have brought you together because they care about what you think. So let them know. Share your thoughts and insights on social channels. Be an active part of the conversation. And don't forget to hashtag Nobel Prize Summit. And with that, it is time to open up session 2, Breakthroughs. I have the great honor to now hand things over to someone who is without a doubt one of the leading thinkers on the future of our planet. Johan Rockström is director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Johan, we are so thrilled that you can join us to open today's main stage session. So let's go to Berlin with Johan now. Take it away, Johan.
Thanks, Christiana, and wonderful to have all of you with us at the Nobel Summit and to this session called Breakthroughs. And breakthroughs is what we need because we've entered the decisive decade for humanity. We're running out of carbon budget. Intact nature that builds our resilience is increasingly rare, and we're coming dangerously close to tipping points. And at the same time, we see social tipping points emerging. Can we make this year a positive social tipping point for humanity? That's the grand question. And we're not talking only about technological breakthroughs, we're talking about social and political breakthroughs as well. And 4 unstoppable forces are aligning. The first breakthrough is political. At the end of this session, we will have John Kerry, climate envoy for President Biden, speaking to Marsha McNutt, president of NAS and co-host for the summit. John Kerry masterminded the Biden Climate Summit, and it's no exaggeration, I would argue, to say that the Biden Summit changed the course of history. The US commitment to cut emissions by half by 2030, following an exponential carbon law, is a game changer. We now have a G3 on climate emerging in the world. The 3 largest economies, the US, China, and the European Union, have adopted targets for net zero by 2050 or latest 2060 in the case of China. This is a key step towards scientific alignment, a necessary but not sufficient step.
Hi, everybody. So John Kerry, it was great to see him, but we're just a little bit early. So we're going to switch things around for just a second, and we are going to head over to meet a very incredible youth activist. It may well be that we have destined the young people of our planet to focus their entire lives on the climate crisis. Our next speaker has embraced that destiny. As a Mexican-Chilean activist, she mobilized hundreds of her high school classmates to take part in a climate strike. Last week she wowed the world leaders convened by President Biden at the climate summit. Her message is clear: we are neglecting environmental and social justice. Her courage and leadership are an inspiration to us all. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce you to Gia Bastida. Gia?
Good afternoon, dignitaries, Nobel laureates, and distinguished guests. My name is Gia Bastida, and I'm a 19-year-old climate justice activist born and raised in Mexico. I am one of the many young people who have been demanding climate justice over the last 3 years by protesting and organizing strikes. This is an issue that is particularly close to my heart, as my hometown was hit by flooding in 2015. Just last week, on Thursday, April 22nd, I spoke in front of 40 heads of state at the Biden Leaders Summit on Climate. I spoke about our demands, which include ending fossil fuel subsidies and investments, stopping the construction of any new fossil fuel infrastructure, and suspending current fossil fuel extraction. At the same time, providing climate education, transitioning to clean renewable energy, and staying in line with the 1.5-degree target of the Paris Agreement, all while centering social justice and equity. We are in such a critical moment that even one of the most ambitious announcements for emissions reductions proposed by President Biden, which is cutting carbon emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030 from 2005 levels, is still not enough. In order to be in track with the Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree target, the United States must cut carbon emissions by 57 to 63% from 2005 levels by 2030, according to Climate Action Tracker, which is a commitment that we expect from President Biden at COP26. In this journey of emissions reductions, we must keep in mind that our target is zero worldwide. We must keep in mind that we should not only target CO2, but also methane and other greenhouse gases, especially now that the permafrost is melting. We must keep in mind that carbon offsets are not solutions. We must keep in mind that there are communities who rely on the health of the Amazon rainforest, the Congo Basin, the Yucatan jungle, the Arctic and Antarctic, the Himalayas, and the health of our oceans, lakes, and rivers. We must keep in mind that climate justice is social justice. And most importantly, we must keep in mind that what we are missing in this conversation about climate and environmental justice is an examination about our very own foundation of morals and values. There is not one thing about the climate crisis that I can tell you, the brightest minds in physics, chemistry, economics, and other professions, that you don't already know. But what I can do is give you some recommendations as to how I think you should question and further implement your knowledge. I say question your knowledge for the following reasons. Most of our frameworks for science, international relations, economics, and others are rooted in ideas of objectivity and emotional detachment, with the ultimate goal of striving for money and power. Countries have engaged in armed conflict because of decisions stemming from realism frameworks. While there is scholarship that counters these frameworks, like writer J. Ann Tickner said, all political action has moral significance. Nevertheless, we have fixated ourselves with the idea that our decisions shouldn't have moral dimensions. Similarly, when it comes to the climate crisis, we have historically convinced ourselves that it is okay to go to war over oil, that it is okay to create technology that results in pollution, contamination, the degradation of ecosystems, and the poisoning of communities. But most dangerously, we have convinced ourselves that humanity behaves like the tragedy of the Commons outlines, which states that if you leave a communal space for people to use without privatization, it will be depleted of resources. But as Elinor Ostrom, who received the Nobel Prize in Economic Science, asserted, local communities are able to maintain balance with nature without top-down regulations or privatization. And I have seen that myself in indigenous communities, including my own. In short, what I'm saying is that it is important to question our very own framework of scholarship. And instead of always striving to move forward, it is time to look back at our ancestral wisdom that teaches us how to live in harmony with Mother Earth, with nature, and with each other. Now, when it comes to implementing your knowledge, there is one very important step that we must all take. We must become advocates and activists of our scholarship. Activism means to act upon something that we care about. We all know that there is a wide gap between what is written in scientific journals and what happens in legislation. The best available climate science, like the one put together by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, clearly shows us that we must drastically reduce our emissions to prevent the worst effects of the climate crisis. Scholarship on feminist international politics shows us that the world lacks gender balance in decision-making. Climate psychology research shows us that we have miscommunicated the magnitude of the climate crisis. And urban health studies show that Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities worldwide are the most polluted and vulnerable to climate disasters. But most of this scholarship stays in books, journals, and out of legislation. That is why we must close that gap and unite the academic sector, the public policy sector, and civil society to come up with intersectional climate solutions that address the complexities of the crisis in a just and equitable way. We must become advocates and activists of our scholarship, because once you make the discovery of a lifetime, it must find its way to the public policy sector in order to preserve long-term stability and joy. In short, I want us to have the heart and the courage to love the world. This is perhaps the most challenging task of all, because it means that we have to shift from individualism to coexistence, from competition to cooperation. It requires that all of us think in an interdisciplinary way and recognize that today, more than ever, our knowledge has the duty of addressing the climate crisis like the crisis it is. If you take one thing away from what I have said today, is that we are not doing enough to prevent self-destruction. The very thing we wanted to prevent through the creation of complex private and public systems. We have been blinded by greed and power. It is time to strive for peace, and it is time to define peace. Peace is the ability to feel joy while breathing clean air and drinking clean water. Peace requires courage, commitment, and determination. The most important thing is that achieving this peace is no longer an abstract path. The youth and the generations of tomorrow demand that you use your knowledge and power of innovation to prevent runaway climate change. We must keep fossil fuels in the ground. We must stop the production of plastics. We must draw down excess carbon in the atmosphere. We must stop the overproduction of goods. We must receive comprehensive climate education. We must center marginalized communities in solutions. We must acknowledge the rights of nature in legislation. We must heal our relationship with Mother Earth, and we need all of us. Science, innovation, and government must be aligned to take care of life, not destroy it. Thank you.
Well, everybody, thank you again. We are bouncing around a bit, but I am once again excited to have the honor to now hand things back over to someone who is without a doubt one of the leading thinkers on the future of our planet. Johan Rockström is the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Johan, we are so thrilled that you can join us to open today's main session. And I think we need to go to Berlin, back to Berlin, and kick it over to Johan.
Yeah, thanks, Christiana, and really sorry to have been bumped out. It's clearly very crowded in the back room of this summit, and I cannot see any more kind of justifiable person to be bumped out from than I understand that John Kerry was the one who caused me to suddenly lose the contact with all of you. And I'm not sure exactly when I lost you, but I was walking through the 4 breakthroughs that we're starting to see. And the number one, of course, has to do with climate envoy John Kerry, the fact that we're starting to see breakthroughs in terms of scientific alignment with the exponential roadmaps of following the carbon law of cutting emissions by half every decade. The second breakthrough area that I hope I was able to mention to you before I was broken off is on economics, and the point that President Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore, pointed out that now zero carbon energy systems are at dollar by dollar parity competitive on the markets in the world, which is of course a game changer. The third breakthrough area is, of course, technological, and we've already started discussing that in our main first session for the summit, that we are at the cusp of a technological revolution on AI, biotech, nanotech, robotics, big data, digital technologies. This revolution can support and accelerate the S-curves towards a sustainable future, but it can also be rebounding and accelerate the pathway in the wrong direction. We're right at the beginning. This is an industrial revolution powered by the digital revolution, and we in science, communities, and stakeholders at large must be part of this journey to be able to keep it within a safe operating space. And the fourth and final important breakthrough is, of course, exactly what CA was so eloquent to sharing with us, the social movements, the unacceptable reality that we're undermining the life support systems on Earth for future generations. And the next generation, as we know so well, has risen and said, enough is enough. You are risking our future on planet Earth. Young people have ignited a social transformation around the world and changing the conversation. Now, announcements today of over thousands of cities and regions declaring a state of climate emergency, creating what I would argue today is a social tipping point. But at the same time, last week, the Cambridge Commission, the first sustainability commission from the Cambridge University Press on behavioral change, released its scientific synthesis showing that individual behavioral change alone is unlikely to scale fast enough. The planetary emergency is too severe. We need strong sustainability, setting quantified scientific targets and limits like end dates on combustion engine, zero loss of nature. We need to position the world economy within hard sustainability boundaries for a resilient planet, as shown by Partha Dasgupta in the recent seminal report for the UK government on the economics on biodiversity. We need the integration of policy behavior innovation, where individual behavior change combines with regulation and policies. Political leadership is fundamentally important. But citizens and social uprising in the world is, of course, key. And that's where it's so inspiring to listen to C.A. Bastida and her fellow youth movement activists around the world speaking so eloquently and powerfully, for example, at the Biden Climate Summit and elsewhere, about justice, representation, and the right to a stable planet. The solutions to climate challenge must be inclusive, they must be fair, they must be about adjusting failings in society, particularly inequality. So altogether, these 4 breakthroughs, the political, the economic, the technological, and the youth movement or social movement fundamental behavioral change creates a space for disruptive decade for innovation and transformation. And this is a decade to close up that needs to add up at the planetary scale. We've never done that before. The world needs to cut emissions by half in 9 years' time and secure Earth resilience along the way. to have any chance of landing Earth within a 1.5 degrees Celsius safe operating space. A global sustainability transformation, not to say revolution. Nothing less than social and technological breakthroughs are needed at speed and scale. That's why this session is so important here at the summit. Back to you, Christiana, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you, Johan. That was great. Okay, now let's move to our next speaker. From a youth activist to the president of an island nation, to the messages you are posting on social media, we recognize the value of all voices at this summit. And we are so very pleased to receive this message from His Excellency, David Panuelo, the 9th President of the Federated States of Micronesia.
Kasalelia, my name is David W. Panuelo, and I am the 9th President of the Federated States of Micronesia, FSM. I bring you warm greetings from our beautiful islands. At the outset, I would like to express our government's recognition, appreciation, and endorsement of the recent United Nations Environment Program report entitled Making Peace with Nature. Readers will find the report surprisingly accessible for all age groups, with simple language making it clear that climate change is an existential threat, arguably a bigger global challenge than any world war, but that we can make peace with nature if we take actions today, and not tomorrow, next week, or next year. I also would like to express my gratitude to Sir David Attenborough for opening the Nobel Prize Summit. I wish to make it known very much on the record that the government of the Federated States of Micronesia has seen and endorses Sir Attenborough's latest documentary entitled A Life on Our Planet. Viewers will find its contents educational and both intellectually and emotionally rewarding. To emphasize how strongly our government fully endorses Sir Attenborough's latest documentary, I would like to share with you one of his many powerful and moving quotes. Sir Attenborough says, "The living world is a unique and spectacular marvel, yet the way we humans live on Earth is sending it into a decline. This film is my witness statement and my vision for the future. The story of how we came to make this our greatest mistake, how, if we act now, we can yet put it right." What Sir Attenborough has said right there is precisely what I want to say and will attempt to convey as I describe what climate change means for our country and what we urge the global community to do next. As of April 2021, the Federated States of Micronesia is comprised of 607 islands, totaling approximately 700 square kilometers of land and more than 2.2 million square kilometers of ocean territory. We are a big ocean state. My native Pohnpei, which you see around me, is our largest island with mountains, rivers, and waterfalls. Here you can see that this is paradise in our backyards, but it is threatened. You see the great bulk of our land area consists of highly vulnerable low atolls that are approximately 1 to 5 meters above sea level. Our people have lived and prospered on these islands for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. The FSM's climate is tropical, and our islands are located on the southern edge of the typhoon belt. Our current conditions, our primary extreme events are droughts, typhoons, floods, landslides, eroding shorelines, and king tides. The western Micronesian states lie in the most active tropical cyclone basin in the world. The Global Climate Risk Index assesses the FSM as the third most at-risk country amongst the Pacific Island countries. Impacts of climate change are already being seen today. In some islands, that means increased rainfall. In others, it means very little rain at all. As the seas rise, protective coral reefs are overwhelmed and storms become stronger. If we are 607 islands today, untold numbers will disappear by the end of the century, unless climate change can be overcome by the nations that caused it. This reality is very profound and frightening. For the FSM, climate change is our single greatest security threat. Part of the answer to this threat is that the world must transition to sustainable and renewable energy. Fossil fuels are not only unsustainable, they are the enemy of climate. If our world is to fulfill its commitments under the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, nations must make a unified and global effort. Through the Montreal Protocol, an international commitment, 98% of ozone-depleting substances have been phased out by the global community. Furthermore, under the recent Kigali Amendment to the Protocol, which the FSM sponsored, especially powerful greenhouse gases known as HFCs, which are used as refrigerants, will be phased out. We can succeed if we work together. It is both possible and essential to improve our quality of life while we also are responsible stewards of our planet. Global solidarity and cooperation are essential. At the opening of the 75th United Nations General Assembly, I called upon the United States of America, with whom we share an enduring partnership, and the People's Republic of China, with whom we share a great friendship, to put aside their political differences and work together to tackle climate change. It is with appreciation that I note the recent development of a climate change working group developed between our American and Chinese partners and friends. The next step is for the whole of the United Nations Security Council to recognize the threat of climate change, to show leadership in this key area, and to work collectively to address it with all of the nations of the world. I have often said that a better world is not something we ask for, but that a better world is something we build. We build a better world through consensus, with a foundation of love and empathy for other human beings. We construct a better world by acknowledging that we are who we choose to be, and then choosing to take responsibility for both ourselves and our communities. For big ocean states like the FSM, climate change is both our greatest security threat and also an opportunity for us to collectively build that better world. For those of you attending this Nobel Prize Summit, wondering what it is that you can do right now to help build that better world, I offer this solution: promote peace, friendship, cooperation, and love in our common humanity to all whom you meet. Really, my friends, it is only by pursuing these ideals that we also can make peace with nature, become good ancestors for our future generations, and take actions today for our global prosperity tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. We truly hope that you are enjoying our program today. Whether you've been with us since we opened the doors to our virtual event, or you just started with the second session, or maybe you're dipping in and out as time allows, or hey, maybe you're just joining us now. Whatever it is, it's all good, and we're just so happy to have you here. And we're glad you're here for what's next. If we were in the room together, we know we'd hear the thunderous sound of clapping to welcome Ginger Shankar for the global premiere of an incredible performance piece called Promises of Our Grandmothers.
Buju Ginawa, Jabawekwe Indigenous. Hello everyone, my name is Tara Hauska. I'm Bear Clan from Couchiching First Nation Anishinaabe, calling you from the front lines of our longtime fight against Enbridge's Line 3. It is a tar sands line that proposes to send its dirty fuel through our sacred wild rice beds, through the headwaters of the Mississippi River to the shore of Lake Superior, one of the Great Lakes. We are calling on the Biden administration and any of those in power to not only stop Line 3, but to shut down Dakota Access Pipeline, to think about the places and spaces all over our mother who are fighting for life, whether it's Mauna Kea or the front lines of the fight over with Aboriginal people of Australia, to the farmers in India, to Oak Flat, to so many places that are standing up for what's right, to the women who are largely leading this fight, the people who are walking in the footsteps of our ancestors, who are fighting for someone who is not yet born yet to have a right and a chance at life on a planet that can sustain us. With that, I want to welcome my incredibly gifted friend Ginger Shea Carr, her friends Suzanne Daim, Daniel French, and an incredible lineup of musicians coming to you from Los Angeles, presenting Promises of Our Grandmothers. So please find your bravery, figure out what really truly matters. Will we put our own comfort in front of life itself? Water is life. Miigwech.
Something's changing in through the wind. I hear the voices calling from within. Seeds were planted, seeds were sown. My mother's song of freedom is my own.
Cuando se juntan las voces a cantar, es como un trueno que al mundo hace temblar, derrumbando a cualquier muro, abriendo camino hacia el futuro.
Now we finally see whose life matters, who is really free. Broken promises, drowning in uncertainty. Now we finally see whose life matters, who is really free. Broken promises, drowning in uncertainty.
فریاد مادران، فریاد من، حبس در غباری آلوده و سنگین، روییدن یک امید، آزادی یک شاه، ولی ما ایستاده چون مادران در انتظار. فریاد مادران، فریاد من، حبس در غباری
gai na we are ya hey, gai na we are hey, ah we are hey oh.
Wow, that was incredible. That stunning piece feels like a great way to kick off the next panel discussion we have for you. Certainly caution and concern are part of any conversation around technologies, but so are hope and optimism, because if this past year has taught us anything, it is that science and engineering are a force of human ingenuity. With that in mind, we have assembled a pretty amazing group of people for this next session. Reina El Kilabui, Tamar Krishnamurti, and Nobel laureate Sir Richard Robert. And our moderator is Nisha Anand, the CEO of Dream Corps, where they are building the future about what we are all dreaming about. And this perfectly frames the panel that is focused on the many avenues for action. Kicking it over to you, Nisha.
Thank you so much, Christiane. That was the perfect introduction. Listening to Ginger Shankar for this panel today. Ginger, thank you, and thank all of your musicians for bringing in our grandmothers. And it's actually how I want to start this panel because Sir Richard Roberts, you told me an interesting way in which you honor all of our grandmothers, and I want to invoke that today with our panel. Could you tell us a little bit about your grandmother clause and why that's important today? I want to invoke it for our panel and why it's important for science, given this current environment we're in too.
Well, I think basically what you're talking about is something that I call the grandmother test. And this relates to students who go home and tell their parents and friends what they do in the lab every day. And science communication is so important. And so if you want to know if you're communicating effectively, you should undertake the grandmother test. And in this test, you go and explain to your grandmother exactly what it is you do in the lab every day and why you're doing it in language that she can understand. And once you feel that she's understood it, she has to then go and tell all her friends what a wonderful scientist you are and boast about you. And if they too understand it, then you have passed the grandmother test. But if it doesn't go that far and you have to start again, I'm afraid you failed and you have to take the test all over again.
And why is that? You know, I was thinking about our breakthrough panel, and all of you are on the verge of different breakthroughs in the industries you're in. Why do you think that language accessibility, that grandmother test, is important to get us into the future? Richard.
Well, are you asking me or someone else?
Sure. Just to give us a
Okay.
little more on that. Thanks.
Yes, I mean, I think it's just that when you look around and you see people who are hesitant about taking vaccines because they don't understand how important these are and what a wonderful health measure this is. And people tend to be a little distrustful about science because I think we as scientists have not done the very best job we could in terms of communicating with the public about what we do. We tend to use acronyms. We tend to use terms that the average person doesn't understand because we're trying to show everybody how smart we are. But that's not smart. What is smart is really explaining things in terms that everyone can understand.
Thank you so much. And so we're going to try to do that today. Also, just for my understanding, since I don't know a lot of the acronyms, but for all of you out there too. And it reminds me something actually, Tamar, of what you said, just turning this a little bit when we were talking, you blew me away when you said, referring again to our grandmothers, that in some ways, our grandmothers were better off than we are today. What did you mean by that? How are moms doing?
Yeah, it's a slightly different kind of grandmother test, I think, to ask ourselves how our quality of life now compares to that of our grandmothers. I really believe that you can measure the health and the thriving of a nation by how its mothers are faring. And, you know, when we were discussing this before, with that metric, we're not actually doing very well in the United States at the moment. So I was referring to our maternal mortality rate, which is the highest in the developed world and has been going up, while that rate in other developed countries has actually historically been going down. And so that increasing rate means that it's actually more dangerous for someone to give birth now in the United States than it was for their mother or for their grandmother.
Can you tell me, just a follow-up, a little bit about what you're doing about that? I know this is something that you're working on right now. It terrifies me to hear that as a mom, and I know you're a mom too. And I'd love to know a little bit about the hope and optimism.
Absolutely. And there is hope for sure. So, you know, many of our maternal deaths, the majority of our maternal deaths, both here in the US and worldwide, are preventable. Many of them occur because of system failures. So these are failures to detect and treat risks and to offer kind of services and supports that are needed by birth-giving people. Much of the failure of the system is due to racism. So racism that has affected our nation's infrastructure, from where we kind of build highways and bridges, to our social norms around patient care, and even kind of disparities in things like treating pain, which is reflected in our numbers. So our nation's Black and Native birth-giving people die from pregnancy-related complications at kind of 2 to 4 times the rate of people who are white or Hispanic or Asian American. So these numbers are pretty shocking, but we are working very hard to try and develop technologies that are really centered around patients' needs, patients' values, and collecting information from patients in between kind of routine prenatal care, so that we can do a faster job of kind of IDing risks and connecting pregnant people to resources that they need in a more timely way.
And I see, Rana, you nodding, and it reminds me a lot of when I hear speak. What you talk about is the possibility of technology and technology of the future, and what we could do to solve some of these problems. So you give me a lot of hope. I want to turn it right to you. And one of the phrases I learned from you was technological stewardship. And I was curious if you could tell me a little bit about why that's so important for the future, and the future you see as possible with that type of stewardship.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm very excited to be here today with you all. And the grandmother test really resonates with me. I'm originally from Cairo, Egypt. And my images and my memories of my grandma is just gathering all of our family in our summer house. And we had mango groves, and the generosity and the hospitality and the level of empathy has definitely been a thread that's inspired my work and my research. So I'm in the business of building artificial emotional intelligence so that we can improve our human machine interfaces, but fundamentally reimagine how we connect and communicate with one another in an increasingly digital universe. So we're trying to quantify people's nonverbal expressions, our facial expressions, our hand gestures, our vocal intonations. We want our computers to be able to detect and interact with us just the way we interact with one another. And one of the big areas of focus for this technology is in mental health, and how can we bring a data-driven approach to quantifying stress, anxiety, depression, autism, Parkinson's. So I think there's a lot of potential use for this technology, and if we do it right, and this is where the technology stewardship comes into place, I feel strongly that as the thought leader and innovator in this space, it's incumbent on me and my team to make sure that we do this ethically, that we do this with diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind. And I spend a fair amount of my energy evangelizing for this new tech category.
Yeah. And I would love to know, it actually brings us right to the point of inequality, which is a perfect transition, which I know this entire conference is looking on the inequities when we talk about global health. And that idea, I'm going to make sure I bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into everything I do in developing this technology. How do you do that? And how do the folks listening today, what are some of the things we can do to make that possible? And, you know, this is for all of you, because I know that each one of you is very passionate about the subject. But Rana, I guess if you could start.
Yeah, sure. I can start. Obviously, in technology, the big issue is, I mean, it's very male dominated as an industry, both for entrepreneurs and investors, the entire ecosystem, really. So I would say, first of all, feel empowered, right? As a consumer and as a user of technology, we have a lot of power in our hands, and I guess the message for everybody tuned in is to be empowered to vote with your feet, like vote for companies and embrace companies that embrace these core values of privacy and ethics and equality and inclusion. As thought leaders and maybe as managers, I think it's important that we prioritize diversity and be very intentional about it. In our field, it's all about data diversity and mitigating data and algorithmic bias. That's something that we spend a lot of our energy thinking about, because we each have our own biases, right? And if we don't have diverse voices around the table, then we're developing and deploying these technologies at scale with not everybody in mind. So yeah, it's really important to be intentional about these things.
And I'm interested about who's around the table. And actually, Richard and Tamar, this is something I've heard both of you talk about, is that women leaders during the pandemic did much better than their male counterparts. I would love to know, one, scientifically, I know, you know, Sir Richard, you were involved a bit in some of the technology that got vaccines out there, but also, you know, Tamar, you study decision making as a science. Are we better decision makers? I'm curious on why this was the case. And this is for both of you.
You know, I think our women leaders are being lauded for their pandemic response. They're, I think, only 10% of our nations are led by women, so it's hard to make comparisons. But I think, you know, bringing it back to Sir Richard's discussion about science communication and thinking about decision making, I think a lot of the successes that we've witnessed for female-led nations have been in implementing effective behavioral measures in response to the pandemic. And the key to doing that, what we maybe haven't done as well in the US, is to engage in good risk communication right from the beginning. And so rather than kind of reactively trying to counter misinformation as it emerges, the science really shows that if people can understand what behaviors they need to engage in and why, with really clear, consistent, transparent messaging from kind of trustworthy sources. And I think especially when that is paired with the social structure and supports to be able to do it, they will. And I think, you know, that's what we've seen in countries like New Zealand and Finland and Taiwan, so countries with strong female leadership. And I can't say for sure why these specific leaders have taken this approach, but bringing it back to diversity, I really do believe that diversity in leadership is necessary, because if you have leaders with the lived experience and the ability to evaluate the evidence in the areas for which they're responsible for making policy, that's actually the only way to represent the voices of the people that they're serving.
And Richard, even with good leadership, I know in your fight on thinking about how do we end world hunger, and you've been on the forefront of activism around this for a long time, there's other blocks in solving it, and not just leadership. But the distribution right now with vaccines, I can't help but think there's some parallels to what you saw in food distribution as well. I'd love to hear just what you're thinking and what needs to be done so that we can solve some of these big problems.
Okay, well, I just make one comment about female leadership. I believe women are so much more empathic And this was a word that Rana was talking about earlier. This is why they make good leaders, because instead of just thinking about themselves, they think about the population that they're serving, about the country they're trying to serve. I think also women tend to be a little more honest than men when they're politicians. I can see a few exceptions to that. For the most part, I think they're pretty honest. And that too is something that comes across in a good leader when you're honest. And I think, Joe Biden actually could almost be a woman. He's got great empathy, and he really is honest about what he's doing. To get to the distribution of resources, I think one of the problems that we face in this world is that the developed countries just go ahead and on and on and on developing things that are good for them without giving much thought to whether or not this is going to be helpful to the rest of the world, and particularly the developing world. And the vaccine situation is a little bit more tricky. There are supply problems with getting all of the key reagents you need. There's also some technical issues, the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, which depend on messenger RNA. These really have great difficulties in terms of the technical expertise and the supplies that are needed in order to make them. But this is something that in time, I think, will be distributed much more widely. But the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccines, these could be made anywhere. They are being made anywhere. But again, the focus has always been people want to look after themselves, and they don't think about the bigger picture, and they don't think about all of the places that they might want to visit in the future, where they're going to go to places where the population is not vaccinated. And so it would be good if people could think a little more widely about that. And the food problem, I think in the developing countries, this is really a tragedy. And I've been organizing a campaign among the Nobel laureates to support the use of GMO technology in order to make plants better, to make better crops, more nutritious crops, crops with higher yields. And what's happened in the West, we've done that. We've got yields maximally, but in the developing world, they've never had the resources to improve their crops. And GMO technology allows them to do that. And for the Europeans to take an anti-GMO stance on an issue that is really about raising money for their organization rather than thinking about the science, I find this appalling. They are killing people in the third world because they are anti-GMO, and they're sending missionaries out to try and stop the developing world from using GMOs to improve crops. And I always tell them it's foolish, because if people are hungry, they're going to go to where there's food. And if Europe thinks it's got an immigration problem now, just wait until Africa gets really hungry.
The conversation brings us back to empathy again with food as well. And so I have to turn it to you, Rana, and talk a little bit about empathy as such an important tool block of what solves problems now, what will solve problems in the future. And I'm curious, when we look at technology and empathy, is it something, can machines learn empathy? Can they learn emotional intelligence? How critical is that for our future? And I'm sure you hear people that that get scared around that thought and that idea. I'd love just to hear your take on it.
Yeah, so empathy is at the core of how we connect and communicate as humans. It's also how we build trust and loyalty. And a lot of how we build empathy is not the explicit words we say, it's actually the implicit behaviors, our implicit nonverbal connections and communications. And so what we're trying to do is, we're trying to build empathetic skills into our machines and into our technologies. A machine will never truly have empathy the way a human does, but it can exhibit signs of empathy. And because technology is so deeply ingrained in everything we're doing, and it's taking on roles that were traditionally done by people, I do think we need to redesign our relationship with machines and put empathy at the center of how we design these things, how we deploy them, how we think about them, how they respond to us as humans. So I'm a huge advocate of taking a very human-centric approach to thinking about all of this. There are truly transformative applications of this technology, everything from mental health and making our roads safer helping us be more productive and connected people. But you're right. This could be, it's very personal data, and it could be really abused and used for manipulation and for surveillance and discrimination and profiling. So I've taken a very strong stance, both for the company, but also more widely, that we need thoughtful regulation to stop some of these nefarious use cases. But also, again, we as leaders and as stewards of this tech category, we need to take the high road. My company has turned down millions of dollars of potential revenue and investment for, in applying our technology and security and surveillance, because we do not believe that that's the right use case. And so I think we need more leaders who are willing to do that. Yeah.
I was wondering if one of y'all wanted to jump in, because this is science and regulation have had a long history of how they work together. And I was wondering if anyone has the right prescription for the future in how we do this. Tamar.
Yeah, I mean,
it looked like you were about to speak.
These are all issues that we're also thinking about in addressing maternal health with artificial intelligence in terms of risk prediction and identification. And, we know these kinds of algorithms that we use, they're only as good as the data that goes into them, which Rana has kind of brought up here. So I think nothing we do in this space is really going to move the needle until it addresses the root causes of inequity. And that's from the perspective of the people that these things are designed to serve. And so always bringing that human element into the planning of research, the development of research, and the kind of dissemination of a product is so critical. So I think an example from kind of my space is you could have a beautiful risk prediction algorithm for maternal mortality that would require data from an ultrasound, but that's only going to work in an environment where you can access an ultrasound. It's realistic, it's affordable. It doesn't have inadvertently harmful consequences, for example, where it might result in unwanted pressure to end a pregnancy, or it might take away from investment in other things that support more basic human needs. And so I think I don't know exactly how you translate that into regulation, but I think always making sure that we come back to the human element in every step of kind of design and implementation of these things is really critical for moving forward.
One of the things that I'm always concerned about when we sort of think about technology and the way that it is really interfering in many cases with people's lives is social media. And, the algorithms now running really direct information from the internet to people who are receptive recipients of it. And so we talk about bias. Rana mentioned bias. And many of these algorithms that are deciding what you're going to get from social media, terribly biased, deliberately biased. And I think this is something that it would be very good if we could find a way around this. I'm not sure legislation is necessarily the way to go, but perhaps artificial intelligence could be used in a much more positive way to make sure that people do not just see one side of a story and get more and more of it and be convinced of things that are simply not true. And, truth is something that is in rather short supply very often.
Absolutely. This, to me, is one of the biggest issues that we're looking at right now is truth. And I look to all of y'all as leaders in your sectors to really help us get there. We're coming up on time, but there's enough time for each one of you. Since this is our breakthrough panel and we're moving towards action, I'd love to give each one of you a chance to talk about what you're working on and how we can act. Any individual watching this today, if there's something, a place where they can go and learn more, or something they can do to take action to get us to this next future, the future that we're all dreaming of, I'd love to hear from each of you what's on your mind. So Rana.
Okay, I'll go first. I would say, please know that you have a say in how technology shapes up and how it unfolds over the next few years. And if you're interested in some of the ethical considerations in developing and deploying AI, check out the Partnership on AI Consortium. It's all about building fair, accountable, transparent, and ethical AI systems. And I want to put a final plug in for empathy and empathetic leadership. Please prioritize empathy. We need more of it.
And Rana, where can people find out more? You mentioned one place, but if they just want to know more about you and what you're doing.
I'm easy to find on social media, but also my book just came out. So Girl Decoded, it's a memoir. And it does simplify the technology. I talk about how do you build emotion AI and why, and some of the ethical and moral questions that we have to ask ourselves. So yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Tamar.
Yeah, so I'm very excited to be kind of working right now on thinking about how we can move from big data to better data with the clinical tools that we're building. So, I think a call to action is, we as scientists need to be more thoughtful, more responsible about the data we're collecting and how we're interpreting it. So in terms of action items for scientists, I would say, to really understand what better data means, we need to be cognizant at every research step about the impacts of our work. So being in truly interdisciplinary teams as we move forward with historians and social scientists and community members as collaborators with us, I think that will help us kind of answer the questions of how our research, how the data we're collecting and using, how that might exacerbate or address existing societal harms. And I think scientists, please run for office, and please vote for scientists who are running for office. That's one way to really kind of get involved and make your voice heard.
Thank you
Nisha,
so much.
Can a call to action
Yes?
be a technology? Can a call to action be a technology Nobel Prize? A Nobel Prize
That
for
would
technology?
There you go. You've heard it. Rana has a call to action for this community. And Sir Richards, you might be the one to answer that call, but what's on your mind?
Well, I can tell you, I've been watching this Derek Chauvin trial, and something that came out during that alarmed me more than anything else was the fact that the initial police report was a series of lies. And it was only because a young lady had had the presence of mind and courage to photograph what was going on, that the police decided, well, now we have to change our report. And I think for me, this just emphasizes that if you're really going to try and do something to reform behavior, whether it's police or anybody else, is to inflict penalties for lying. We need more truth. We need people to just simply tell the truth. We may not want to hear it all the time, and it may not be good in terms of getting elected, but it is important. And I think in the long run, people who tell the truth become respected. And that would be really my message. If you want to know more about what I'm doing, you can email me. I'll be happy to send you some sites and places you can go. But my work is on bacteria. I love bacteria. I think they're the greatest. And I would love to have the opportunity to convince you of the same.
That's fantastic. And my organization is called Dream Corps. I'll take moderator privilege to tell you that we have a member network of folks that fight on criminal justice reform, climate justice, and tech equity. So we fit right in the wheelhouse here, and our members are active. We have actions you can take. We also have the Empathy Network. So I'm really glad that we've worked on this, and the Empathy Network tells truth, and they tell their stories to try to change hearts and minds around the country. So you can also join us at Dream Corps. I really appreciate you all here today for bringing in our grandmothers, checking in on the moms, and thinking about how do we start addressing inequality, that the next breakthrough that comes has to address inequality or it's not a real breakthrough. And so I really appreciate you all being with us today. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Christiane, and I'll see everyone later. Thanks.
Thank you, Nisha and panelists, so much. That was so informative and really inspiring. So we see we've got quite a few viewers on our live stream and a lot on our main site, which is amazing. We are so happy to have you, however you are finding us. But if you want to be part of the chat rooms or to record in a video chat booth, you do have to be on the main summit site, which is the link you received with your registration confirmation. So just keep that in mind to get your conversations going on this platform. All right, so that panel discussion felt like the perfect lead into our next one-on-one conversation between Nobel laureate Dr. Stephen Chu and Undersecretary General Natalia Kanem. These are two people who, each in their own way, have a long history on focusing on solutions. So I am so excited to welcome Dr. Chu and Dr. Kanem.
Well, thanks so much. And I'm very excited to be here with you and with Steve Chu to discuss giving power to solutions. The world population is projected to reach almost 10 billion by the year 2050, which is an increase of more than 25% from the current population, which is around 8 billion. It's 7.8 billion. It is critical that we get smart about the relationship between population and the planet to make the best policy choices and avoid the pitfalls of the past. So I'm here for UNFPA. We're the United Nations Population Fund that puts women and girls at the center with a focus on upholding sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. Over time, the world realized that you can't dictate population size to people. It's the woman's choice. And it's clear that given a choice, women know exactly what they want. They want the number of children that they can afford and nurture. So, how to give power to solutions? For me, one way is by supporting women's own power, their power to control their fertility. When a woman has the power to make that choice, she's more likely to have power in other spheres of her life as well. We've studied this, and she gains not only in terms of personal autonomy, but also through advances in health and education, in income, and in safety. So she thrives, and so too does her family. That's why I think UNFPA has stood behind choice that can change the world. Right now, there are around 218 million women who want to avoid pregnancy, but they lack access to modern contraception. UNFPA is the largest provider of donated contraceptives to low and middle income countries. And we try to put that power to choose in the hands of millions of women and couples. So the power to make solutions and to make powerful solutions can be put into a woman's hands. And we have power too. Data and evidence shows this. Humans created a lot of these problems, and I do believe that humans can solve them, and not just women, but of course, everyone. So, Stephen, turning to you because your work is so fascinating and you've engaged with solutions throughout your vast realms of expertise and experience. And would love to know more about your thoughts on this issue of giving power to solutions.
Well, first, I couldn't agree with you more about having women have freedom to choose what to do with their own bodies and how to, if they're going to raise families, what size family and what that could be the most nurturing. But looking on a broader scale, this is intimately linked with many of the other things that we face in society. And when you think of the major challenges, I think of food. How are we going to have the ability to grow the food for this rapidly increasing population? And with food, water, and clean water and access, and clean and health, and climate change, and the fact that as people want to rise out of poverty, they will naturally consume more energy, more people, more energy, higher productivity, all good things. But this is leading in a very bad direction if you take the totality of all these stresses. So going back to what you just spoke about, you can't really talk about sustainability until the world population is stabilized. And indeed, we have something that we know already, that in societies where there's rapidly increasing prosperity, increasing education among especially women, and having access to, so they can control their own bodies. What you find is that the world population in those sectors go down. And it cuts across all countries, across all religions, races, you name it. Wealthier people, more educated people have fewer children. This is looked upon with horror by some, including many economists, that said, well, I don't understand. If you have fewer people, if you don't have a growing population, then how are you going to use the more people in the younger age sectors, the productive workforce, to actually create more prosperity for the older people? And so in the United States, this is known as a Ponzi scheme. That means you have people, if you grow and you sell more shares of something, you don't have to actually figure out exactly what to do. And it's famous in the world of how these Ponzi schemes work. You take money from investors, and you grow the number of investors, and then even though you don't produce anything, you can take the money from the new investors, give it back to the old investors, and everything looks really rosy, but you haven't done anything. Except it's worse than that in this global consumption, in a world of 7.5 billion going to 10 billion, going to 11 billion. You have to design an economy based on no growth, and no growth or even shrinking growth. I deeply believe it's possible to have rising prosperity with a stable or even declining population. And so, but unless we get off this treadmill, where you can't have any real sustainability, the growing number of people use more resources.
Well, it's interesting to consider how the numbers of population have grown, and the question of the big number can sometimes mask the inequalities that are inherent within societies. And so I think the question of how you invest in the people you have, and how, again, the choice of a young person with an education, and you've already laid out the difference that education makes in terms of that trajectory, makes a huge difference. I mean, when I think of a girl at a fork in a road, if she is married as a child under the age of 18, her future is pretty much cooked, and it's a future that's going to be one of lack of economic possibility. So rather than unleashing her creativity and having her participate, not just in her family or in her economy, but really to fulfill her full potential, that cohort needs investment. And we have seen that in every country where economic possibility has increased, these types of investments have been part and parcel of women being able to participate equally in society. Part of that equality between women and men is their ability to be able to conduct themselves in the public commons. And so it's not a trivial matter when a woman understands perfectly well that she would like to limit her family size. But as a global community, have we been able to empower that? The investments in people also, I think, has shown up during this global pandemic, Steve, because this is a pandemic where we've seen the fault lines of what years of a poor health system will do, what years of structural inequality, racism, discrimination, and the type of gender-based inequality that translates into institutional neglect. So it's not a coincidence that the poorest people, the most vulnerable people, the most isolated people have been hardest hit by this pandemic. And to recover from that, the food equation and the energy equation is going to be part of it, because a sustainable climate, again, the climate issues hit the poorest and the most vulnerable first. So I think COVID will force us to respond in new ways. And for UNFPA, digital technology has been really, really important to be able to highlight who these vulnerable people are. Where are they? Where are they located? Telemedicine is enabling our doctors in remote areas of Mongolia to be able to converse with that midwife, that nurse, with other health professionals. I hasten to say that unfortunately, and I think you've seen this in your travels as well, that digital divide, though, means that it's not easy. It's not easy for an out-of-school girl in a poor country to be able to use the virtual space the way her counterpart in a country where you have electricity, not even to mention internet and that type of availability. Lately, I've been saying that as the head of the Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, one of my wishes for the girls of the world is for her to have a mobile phone under her control. Information that, okay, it might not be the latest model or whatever, or why not, but that she can, to a certain extent, access that type of information, that type of life-saving information that can make a difference. In our work also, sadly, the phone can connect you to a hotline if you need someone to come and rescue you, because part of the problem has been the burgeoning domestic violence that the restrictions on movement have wrought on during this time of COVID. So I think part of our power of solutions discussion is that flexibility to, whether policy on the page or in practice on the ground in communities, be able to really let people devise their own solutions and support them to be able to do better with that. It's a global community. And as our Secretary General has said, solidarity is humanity and solidarity is survival. Back to you, Steve.
Well, you're raising a very interesting point. Going back to you were talking about health, and it reminds me. Several years ago, my wife and I, as we get older, start to form bucket lists, and one of our bucket lists is we wanted to go on an African safari. But as we go gorilla trekking, and you also go through villages, and you go on dirt roads, and you begin to look around. And I think the most interesting part of that safari is what I saw in people living in the countries. And what I saw were people walking barefoot for kilometers, toting water, or pushing heavy sacks of goods, 100 kilos of potatoes on a bicycle, so heavy that the tires were deflated, because they had no mechanical power except people power, not even beasts of burden. And you see this, and then you see this, going to the village well could be a kilometer or two away and porting water back because there's no plumbing. And if you think about all this, and then one of the guides, I started chatting with him, and he said, he had 2 kids, and became educated, and he was trying to start a little farm business. He didn't want to be a driver his entire life. And we spoke about how he grew up, and he was in a family of about 6 or 7 people. And I said, and 6 or 7, are you going to have 6 or 7? He said, oh, no. When I have kids, I expect them to live to an old age. And when my father and mother had kids, they did not. And so having more kids was insurance. So ironically, the best incentive for having fewer kids, besides having information and access, is to actually get wealthy enough that you will survive your childhood and your adulthood and die in old age. And this So increased healthcare actually automatically lowers the birth rate. And it means that you can put your resources of your parent resources on a few kids and nurture them much more than you could have before. So again, what I see is this deeply connected world where, and everything in it. And so, everything relieving poverty, increasing education, improving healthcare means that you aren't on this treadmill rat race Ponzi scheme. And and with all those things, then you say, okay, then you can actually at least have what limited resources we do have. Yes, we are going to need technology to grow more food, better food for a growing population. Yes, we want all peoples of the world to eat better, to have access to the type of protein and nourishment we want. But it gets hard to do that if you're going from 7 billion to 10 billion to 15 billion and beyond. It's impossible. And so again, I see this as all becoming a very collected single problem. It's many problems, but they're also intimately connected.
Well, very profound issues. And I think ultimately the power of human rights is also part of helping to preserve the planet. I think the ability of women and girls to exercise that control, we've seen over and over again. And so that's why at UNFPA we say the future really belongs to the 10-year-old girl. She should be equipped, she should be educated, she should be able to exert power over her own body and in her own sphere. So thanks for those insights. I also believe that part of the decision that parents make is also predicated on them having an understanding of the human body, the availability of education and good health care, and ultimately jobs to support themselves and their families, and to participate actively in driving society's prospects for prosperity.
But there's also something else going on which makes me optimistic in part. You talked about cell phones, and what I saw as I toured around in Safari was they were around, and I learned that the first thing people buy, the first electrical thing that a person will buy is a cell phone. Because that cell phone means so much. It means you can figure out what's going on with your friends, your relatives, your family. You can figure out when you want to bring your crops to market, everything.
Yes.
And so then I think, in cell phones, we leapfrog past the earlier development of earlier developing countries where we had landlines. And then I looked at what I was seeing and saying, well, wait a minute, people, there was very little irrigation in the countries I was in. Well, this is kind of crazy. What do you need for irrigation? You need power to pump water from a well. But we have power. We have very inexpensive solar panels today. And so with the right business model, you can use that. When the sun shines, you can pump the water. You pump the water into a little tower. And so that's stored energy. When you have the energy, you use it. Now it's stored in form of a little reservoir of water, which you can irrigate your crops. You can use the same power to purify the water for health. There are so many things where you can leapfrog past what we did 100 years ago and 200 years ago with these new technologies, cell phones, solar energy, energy storage. But not only energy storage in the form of a battery, energy storage as in the purified water, the pumped water, things of that nature. And so again, the optimism is that in the right structure, with the right business model, and by the right business model, I mean the business model that allows people in the country to start the businesses, yes, you can start with helping a lending hand, but in the end, it's got to be self-sustaining. And that same business model, because if you have as the electrification, electric motors, electric bicycles, and three-wheelers drops in price, you can imagine you can leapfrog past those people carrying these heavy weights on their own heads or shoulders, or pushing them on a bicycle to a motorized vehicle. When you have those things, when you don't have to worry about your health, you are educated, you can take advantage of all these things, and then this technology allows you to leap forward faster. And so again, the optimism is we have the potential to do this. The sad part of it is the incumbents in countries don't actually want it. They would prefer that you buy diesel fuel to generate electricity. They prefer it if you buy kerosene lanterns and use kerosene instead of LEDs, which are much worse for your health and indoor air pollution. And so you have incumbents that say, well, this is how I make my money, and try to convince people, no, don't try this new stuff. It's not going to work, or it's not reliable. And so then you see this other tension. And how do you convince people that it's better? But the other thing is you have to make sure that the new stuff is the real stuff and not the counterfeit junk, because the counterfeit junk poisons the waters. And
well, Steve, I think we have to leave it there, but obviously lots more to say on the power of solutions. Thanks so much. Great talking with you.
Great chatting with you also.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for that informative and thorough discussion. That was so interesting. Okay, we're coming to the end of our session, but we've saved this next conversation for last because it's worth waiting for. Now we are going to go live to the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. to President Marcia McNutt, who will now be speaking with Secretary John Kerry, Special U.S. Presidential Envoy for Climate. And just a little context of what that actually means. His title, Special Envoy, is code for one of the biggest jobs out there today, to transform the U.S. economy by creating jobs and cutting carbon emissions in half in a decade. No small feat. I'm going to take it from the Beckman Center over to D.C. I'm kicking it over to you, Marcia, and Secretary Kerry. Take it away.
For you. I will be moderating this conversation with Secretary John Kerry, who is our favorite diplomat at this point because he is the President's Special Envoy for Climate. So we have high hopes of this man to help us solve all of our problems. Now, Secretary Kerry and I used to be neighbors back when he was at the State Department, right across the street from us here at the National Academy. But I didn't think he would remember the first time we ever met, which was decades ago when we were seated next to each other on the former Eastern Airline shuttle that went between Boston and DC. And I was a young faculty member at MIT. I kept looking over at him saying, gosh, this guy looks familiar. And finally, I got up the courage to say, are you a movie star? And he was so gracious with my faux pas because he simply took my hand, shook it, said, hello, I'm John Kerry. I'm your senator. So that grace that he showed that day on the airplane certainly came to the forefront in every other position he's held. His ability to read people and make them feel good about working with him is a rare talent. So now he is just off this historic summit that President Biden convened with many wonderful advances in national plans to control the heat trapping gases from fossil fuels. We'll hear more about that from him. But the first thing I'd like to ask you, Secretary Kerry, is as scientists, what can we do to help you? If there was one question that you would say, science, if you can get me an answer to this, my job would be so easy, what would that be?
Well, Marcia, first of all, I don't know if I was being gracious or I was stupefied and trying to figure out whether it was a compliment or an insult. But anyway, um, we're in a difficult moment. We're really in a tough moment. I don't want to gloss it over in any way whatsoever. We were told by scientists a couple of years ago, the UNFCCC, IPCC, that there are 12 years within which we need to make the most critical decisions to prevent the worst consequences of the climate crisis. And we've now squandered 2.5 of that before the Biden administration came in. And we hear from many people, politicians, scientists, and others, that obviously this is an existential issue. It is for many people right now, and for a lot of people not. But we're not behaving as if it is existential. And I think science, I mean, the scientists gave us this warning, and yet scientists have fallen prey. I know they don't like to be in the crosshairs of politics, nor should they be, but they've fallen prey to a discrediting that has happened to people across society, not just here in America, in other countries too, because there's an anger, there's a cynicism and a frustration at large in the body politic of a lot of countries. And so, we can have people go on TV in the United States still and say, well, there really isn't a scientific consensus about man-made climate, et cetera, and which is just not true. So we're confronting in the United States and in other parts of the world a confrontation with whether or not we can reestablish a baseline of truth in our society, in our politics. And it is critical to us to be able to do that with respect to the climate crisis because the stakes are so high. And yet we see a polarization based on politics, based on exploitation. And frankly, there's also been, I think, a war on science in these last years in America. So if you don't find enough people to fight back against this paid for denial that has taken over our society, there was denial even as to COVID, but the denial as to climate has been more persistent and longer, and it's costing us enormously. So we have to reestablish means. We've lost some of the referees that used to make those judgments because they too have been discredited, i.e., the President of the United States or an anchor on one of our television stations. We have to reestablish a baseline of truth, or we can't build consensus in a democracy. And this is a critical component of moving forward. I think back to the role scientists played post-World War II in credentialing the efforts to rein in nuclear weaponry. The very scientists who had created it. We need a reestablishing of a kind of a baseline of credibility here. And I know, as I said, scientists, generally speaking, want to avoid the fray, but we are in a war against denial. We are in a war against facts, against science. And so I think we have to fight back. And I think scientists have to be at the front of that fight because they hold a special place in the hierarchy of our society. Medical scientists particularly have clout right now with respect to getting people persuaded about what they need to do. And so we're in a race against time. We really are. We don't even have 9 years within which to make all these decisions because you've obviously got to implement them. So 2020 to 2030 is a critical decade. And all these people talking about net zero by 2050, that's 30 years away. If we don't do what we need to do between 2020 and 2030, We can't hold the Earth's temperature to 1.5 degrees. We can't achieve net zero by 2050. So this is a critical moment where lots of different previously easily accepted voices of respect in our society have got to reclaim a baseline of truth and reclaim the capacity to build consensus.
Well, I agree with you completely, and that is obviously one of the goals of this summit, is to make sure everyone's clear on the consensus and that there is no doubt but that scientists support it. So let me talk about solutions. Science has been really good to point out the problem, but now we need to turn to solutions. That was the focus of your summit. You set some pretty lofty goals. Do we have all that we need in the way of science, engineering, and innovation to achieve those goals, or do we need to put science on steroids to get you what you need to be?
Well, the answer is yes. We need to put science on steroids. We need to have the most major commitment to R&D, to innovation, technology. We've got to find, for instance, we have made major leaps forward in battery capacity. We now have utility scale battery for 4 hours. We have greater capacity. We're exploring hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. There are huge possibilities staring us in the face. But the truth is, science tells us that about 50% of the reductions we need to make in emissions are going to come from technologies that we still have not got to scale, or we've not put out there in the marketplace. But I have an optimism about this. I really believe we're on the cusp of the greatest potential economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution. This is an enormous market. There are 4.5 to 5 billion users today. This market is going to grow. We just heard in the prior session to 10 billion potential users in the next 30 years. So this is a market where already you see banks, asset managers, private equity, different folks moving in that direction. You can't fund a coal-fired power plant in the United States. You can't do it in Europe. Wish there were more countries where you couldn't do it, because right now half the coal-fired power of the world is in China, and China's funding 70% of the coal-fired power around the world. So we've got to rein in coal. I was glad that China stepped forward and said they're going to strictly limit coal now. We have to give that meaning. But this has to happen at an accelerated pace. And I believe as the market moves in that direction, as, for instance, 6 banks just pledged that over the next 10 years, they're going to put $4.16 trillion into this new energy economy. As that happens, it's going to accelerate. And much of the technology is sort of old technology that doesn't lend itself to Moore's law particularly, but we could have a breakthrough. Bill Gates has said we need the breakthrough, we need the miracle of storage, or the miracle of fusion, or the miracle of fission. I think there are more miracles we might need than just that, but I think they're within the mind's eye. We can contemplate them. We know the direction we have to go in. And I am really confident that as we put the funding in, if we direct our R&D, if we accelerate like a moonshot on steroids, we can get this done, and we will get it done. But if we continue as we are today, in a sort of business as usual, with a polarized nation, divided even over the basic facts and over the science, this is going to be tough. And I think we've got to, be honest about where we are. There is a gap. What I have said to my team working on this, we want to push to go to Glasgow, which is the next UN meeting. And we want to push with high ambition, try to keep 1.5 degrees alive, and try to set a target for how we get to 2050 net zero with specificity, certainly for the 20 largest economies of the planet that equal 81% of all the emissions. So if we can get them moving, the rest will follow. And I believe that we can do that, but Glasgow is a critical moment for us to get on track in order to be able to accomplish our goals. It's doable, absolutely doable. But I also have said to our team, we need to be honest with people that there is a gap still. We could get to 85%, maybe 90% renewable based and still take care of base load and heat our homes and not worry about brownouts or blackouts. But that last 10 to 15% remains complicated still. I think there are plenty of ways to close that gap, potentially even, you have to keep alive the possibility even of the fourth generation modular nuclear or something. We just have to have an all of the above attitude and go after it with a vengeance.
Yeah. Well, your comments remind me, Secretary Kerry, about the old statement that the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stones. And the carbon age is not going to end because we run out of coal and fossil fuels, but it's going to end because we've got a better idea. And if you don't jump on board with the better idea, you're going to be the Neanderthals of the carbon age.
And that was spoken by the oil minister of Saudi Arabia.
Wow. Fabulous.
Just to put it in perspective.
Okay. Well, Secretary Kerry, you have been so generous with your time. I love your insights. As I say, you're our guy now for policy with climate change. And please
President
understand.
President Biden is the man on this. And,
right. Of course he is, but he's doing. Yeah, but he's been doing a million things, whereas this is your day job. So we really appreciate you taking it on. And please know that the National Academy of Sciences, right across the street from your former office, is here ready to help you with anything you need to make your job easier. So be sure to call on us.
We need you in the fight, big.
All right, thank you. So now I'm just going to do a quick, thank you again, a quick wrap up of today's activities. So we heard from so many distinguished people from academia, from industry, from policy. If there is one theme that I want to pull out of today's discussions, it was connections. We're all connected economically. We're also connected through the environment, and we're connected in a One Health manner. We've seen from this pandemic that it moved from animal populations to human populations and then exploded all over the globe. And we're connected socially as well. We won't solve these problems until we solve them everywhere. But we have to keep trying, and it is summits like this that allow us to all understand the connections that we all have and how these connections can both make us stronger, but also mean that any one person making a unilateral decision in one place will affect everyone else. So I invite you all to join us tomorrow. We're going to turn to exploring solutions. We're at a pivotal moment in human history, a time when momentum is building all over the world to address this. I invite you all to join us tomorrow to understand how we're going to transition from the carbon age to the post-carbon age. And you better be there or become a Neanderthal. So thank you again to all our speakers, panelists, discussion leaders today. It was a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Marcia, Senator Kerry, wow, that was amazing, and I could not agree with you more on so much that was said. Whew, what a day, and my goodness, it went fast. I hope it went as fast for you as it did for me. The first session already feels like it was yesterday, and I'm feeling like I am ready for tomorrow now. But it's not really over because there's still more that you can do. Think of this time as a reception or like cocktail hour. Imagine the doors to the auditorium opening and you are all spilling out into the great hall at the National Academy of Sciences. If you've been there, you can picture it. It's grand, historic, and the architecture is fabulous, and the art is incredible. And if we could feed you, the food would be amazing. So this isn't exactly that, but you can head out to the Exploration Hub. We have an exhibit of haute couture dresses inspired by Nobel Prizes. We have another exhibit that hangs on the walls of the National Academy of Sciences that you tour virtually that features Nobel laureates. And just like that, just like at an in-person reception, you can say hello to your fellow attendees at the networking lounge, where we've got 2 round tables in there that are organized by topic. There are chat threads organized around the 3 summit themes, and you can connect with other attendees there as well. And make sure to look for something called the video booth, pledge booth, where you can record a video and leave it here for us, expressing your hopes for the future of the planet. You can also check out tomorrow's program. We're back on the main stage for our final session. We're starting with something really fun called the Liquid Lab. You'll need a few supplies to participate, and we'll post those on our closing slides. But it means we can all take a seat with a cocktail or a mocktail or a coffee or whatever you might choose. I might even join you. And then if this is your jam, we're actually about to kick off the academic science sessions, and you can take a look at what's on for Wednesday's solution sessions. But for now, we're turning down the stage lights and asking you to exit the lobby. We hope you learned something, questioned something, liked something, shared something, asked something, and now maybe feel like you want to do something. Please don't forget to share what you take away from today on social media. Our hashtag is #NobelPrizeSummit, and if I haven't said this enough, we genuinely want to hear from you. One thing I hope you do is come back tomorrow, because it's not over yet, and we have more in store for you. I'm Christiana Mertens in Irvine, California at the National Academy of Sciences Beckman Center, and I look forward to seeing you for session 3, refreshed and ready to dive back in for our final main stage session, which starts at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1900 in Sweden. Have a great rest of your afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you may be in the world, and we cannot wait to see you tomorrow. Ciao!